I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The-Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. Today's guest is Bob Liodice, the Chief Executive Officer of the ANA, one of the world's oldest and largest marketer associations. Bob, welcome to the show. What a pleasure to see you even virtually after quite a while, but I am just delighted to be spending time with you today.
Deb, it's so great to see you again. Thank you for sharing this time. This is a long overdue reconnect, and we've always had very lengthy conversations about so many things. I'm looking forward to this one.
Oh, wonderful. I am as well. Well, okay, before we dive in to what's ahead,
Sure.
I think it's pretty important to just start with some of your thoughts about the past year in marketing. I'm curious as to how you would characterize 2021 for the industry. Are we moving beyond immediate COVID concerns? Do you see other marketing interests or issues? Was it about growth in 2021? I know that's so important to the ANA mission, but I'd love to start with that to just frame things.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I almost lump 20 and 21 into kind of a similar bucket, largely because there is nothing that I think spreads across the entire client-side marketer ecosystem. What we have seen is that the landscape has become very uncertain. Things are changing very, very dramatically. And what we've also seen is a great degree of agility and innovation by just about every segment of the marketing ecosystem. And so what you see, I think, is a lot of trial, particularly by the client-side marketers, as to how things resonate with their respective consumer or customer base. And I am wildly enthusiastic about how more capable we have become, how technology has changed the way we do business, and how, in fact, there is a far greater appreciation of this notion of consumer authenticity, that those relationships that marketers are looking to have with their consumers and customers has kind of taken first stage, where we now have the opportunity to be able to focus in on how we can manufacture a very, very strong one-to-one relationship with the consumer audience base. And that's different for every sector of the economy. When you think about the variety of industries that we have and the wide-ranging level of tools and capabilities to make that connection, people are experimenting and trying on different things to be able to move that relationship to center stage, which is what I should have said before. And in that regard, we are innovating and creating, and you see so much technology coming about. But that being said, we also have a history and a litany of issues that we also have to take into account. Privacy is first and foremost something that we're all trying to navigate as Google deprecates cookies and Apple IDFA policies are also changing. We're still dealing with a variety of transparency issues where marketers do not have the universe of information that they absolutely require to optimize their decision-making process. We have measurement issues and so on and so forth. I mean, we could essentially say that while we are becoming more innovative, we do need to make more progress in some of the issues that handicap us as marketers.
No, you're so right. And it's tricky because not only do marketers have to be concerned about their own agenda, and increasingly, I think, a broader agenda that aligns with the CEO, but you've got to look at those changing consumers and try to navigate what's happening there, which isn't always easy, and then be able to almost in real time try to make connections and create results. So I always do find it amazing, though, that in times of difficulty, you do see the innovators come out on top. And I think that it is a lot to do with just the fearlessness of trying things.
Well, you brought up the concept of COVID before. If you go pre-COVID, marketers and their respective partners always looked out 6 to 12 months and tried to plan their strategies based upon the environment. But as COVID has obviously created this wide swath of uncertainty, the ability for marketers to go long on their planning has become a very, very challenging situation. So what you see are a lot of more narrow window types of efforts and campaigns to understand the relative level of stickiness that in fact can take place, and see whether this is something that can in fact initiate a different set of longer term strategies that become endemic to that respective marketer.
No, you're right. In the middle of the pandemic, I was talking to someone, a marketer, who actually said that she defined long-term planning now as a week. So, so talk about innovating faster. And I think
All right.
at that moment in the pandemic, it did feel like a week. Well, while we're still on 2021,
Yeah,
let me just ask you something else, because
sure.
the ANA word of the year for 2021 was diversity.
Right.
And now that's certainly a word that we've heard a lot about. It's one of those loaded words. Is it diversity of thought? Is it diversity of race, ethnicity? Et cetera, et cetera. But the ANA, has had so many programs
Right.
to look at this for such a long time. I mean, you've got your multicultural events. See Her was a massive initiative. I noticed recently that you've got some research on the LGBTQ
Right.
community and their perception or their role in advertising. So could you talk a little bit more about what your marketer members expect from these more inclusive initiatives? And then I guess the next part of that is I'd love to hear if you think a lot of these DEI issues are really taking off and that we've made some real progress in them.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one we could probably talk for hours about. But let's take some of the foundation. If you go back 5 years, we were an industry that we knew at least just by looking at us that we were not diverse. And every intellectual paper or piece that I'd ever seen said, if you want to be able to improve the way you market, or the way you make decisions, you need to have a greater level of diversity and embrace that with a level of inclusion within that diversity, so that you create a more powerful and innovative enterprise. And part of the issue that we had at that point in time is that physically we were not diverse. We did not have the measurement tools to know that relative level of diversity. And we also did not necessarily embrace a multicultural marketing approach that would in fact reach to the far corners of our country, and not recognizing that in fact, at least now, 40% of the United States is what we currently call minority, which will become a majority in a relatively short span of time. So our respective perspective on looking at diversity and the way we market to that diverse group was very much handicapped by a lack of information. I think what we've experienced over the last 5 years, and has really come to a head in the last 1 or 2, is that there's great momentum in becoming far more intelligent and far more capable in understanding how diverse we are, how much multicultural marketing that there is, and where the pockets and the gaps are for us to be able to pursue more aggressively and assertively, so that we work to become a far more diverse, far more inclusive type of industry. And you're right, there have been a number of programs that have essentially exploded. But I think the most important thing is that for the most part, the people in our industry have become far more aware and far more accepting of our previous deficiencies before, and are working more energetically and in a focused way to be able to pursue aggressively what those issues are. For example, one of the things that we found out through our See Her effort is something that we created called GEM, the Gender Equality Measure. And what this is, very, very simply, is an opportunity to determine whether there is unconscious bias in your ads, so to accurately portray women appropriately within those ads. And we found empirically that when you remove that unconscious bias, your ads perform better, leading to more material growth and better business and brand performance. We didn't have that. We're now doing the same thing for the broad cultural side with a metric called SIM, which is a cultural index that is going to do the same thing for the broad cultures that we have as we're currently doing for gender. The level of science that is now coming in this area is growing at a very, very rapid rate, such that it's the whole focus on diversity that is now materializing in a robust way that is allowing us to make those better marketing decisions.
No, that's very interesting, and I don't think that everyone realized that that objective level of research that has helped with this. I mean, in many ways, marketers have a responsibility, and I've heard Mark Pritchard talk about that,
Right.
of portraying. I mean, marketers influence contemporary culture in portraying their customers with the right mix of people who are using their brands and so on. So, and I know Mark has been pretty aggressive about
Certainly has.
ensuring, that the numbers that you gave with 40% being a combination of all minorities, that P&G is trying very hard to show that. But there's also issues within the companies themselves. And I know that makes it even more complex for marketers than it might for people in other roles.
Yeah, and we also have to practice what we preach in that. And so
Mhm.
if we applaud the concepts and strategies of diversity, then we ourselves have to become more diverse, and that has to be reflected in our staffs, particularly at the senior leadership levels. And again, we are now empirically measuring. We've done now 4 years worth of studies that identify the level of diversity. And that's the area that we're making slow progress. In fact, in the latest studies that we've done, we finally started to see an uptick in the breadth of the diversity that we have been aspiring to have. So it's been a relatively slow level of change, and particularly at the leadership levels, we have not moved in the direction that we've said. From a gender standpoint, we have. In fact, 2/3 of our industry are females, and 55% of our CMOs are females. So we've moved very, very assertively and appropriately in that direction, but we still have more side in terms of ethnic diversity.
Interesting, very interesting. But congratulations on really coming up with some of these objective standards for figuring this out. I think it's really important. Well, I've got just a quick question for you before we
Sure,
get
Ellie.
into the coming year. But it's really more of a comment than anything else. But I know that that conferences and industry gatherings is such a core part of what the ANA offers, and 2021 for you was really very much of a hybrid year.
Yes.
Do you see, I assume you see that continuing?
Yeah. There is no question that hybrid is part of our long-term future. And it has, I think, a lot of blessings long-term that associated with it. By making some of these larger events in particular virtual, you have the ability to reach a broader audience. And we've seen that time and again, that the ability to bring in your respective members or whoever your constituents are has been dramatically overhauled by the conversion to virtual. But there is so clearly an incredible desire for having in-person events. And we did move back to those in-person events in June of last year. And we did about 9 or 10 major conferences. And they did start small. I mean, we only had like 100 to 150 in some of our earlier events in person, which was substantially reduced from what we were used to in pre-COVID times. But that started to pick up the pace. And by the end of the year, when we did our Masters of Marketing and Multicultural and Law conferences, we had anywhere from 300 to 500 people that were in person. Again, not our typical standards, but we were starting to move in the right direction. More importantly, forget about the statistics for a moment, was the feeling of being together again. I mean, there was such an incredible desire for people just seeing each other again and being in the same room and enjoying what, over the 2 years of the pandemic, we had essentially given up to move to a screen strategy in order to be able to conduct business. But that deep down feeling of wanting to be in the same room as everybody else was so pronounced and profound that we would never move away from in-person activity, even if it would be smaller than what we had used to at the ANA.
Well, it's funny because I used to say a while ago, and you might remember my saying it, you're either personal or you're scalable. And, I think maybe this is a way of navigating both that we never would have imagined. So,
And it creates opportunities. I am just a one quick aside. I mean, last year we conducted an experiment called the Global Day of Learning.
mhm,
And
mhm.
what that was simply, you know, let's see if there's a way we could train the world. And we opened it up to a global audience, and we had a number of other associations and organizations participate. But we had a 24-hour session of lots of groups providing intellectual capital for free. And we reached an audience of 85 countries with more than 8,000 individuals that came and participated and were actively involved in selecting those areas for how they could become better marketers or practitioners, without any of the encumbrances of travel or even cost.
No, and that's great. And I think it's in the variety that satisfies a lot of needs. And that's wonderful, but that's our future.
Exactly.
So now on to 2022,
Ah,
the coming year. So what do you think are the top concerns of marketers now? I mean, I wonder, does purpose still matter? Are people more focused on the metaverse and NFTs? Are they trying to better navigate sustainability as a marketer? I mean, what are you finding that your
yeah.
members are most worried about?
Well, it's a great question, and whenever I hear a question like you just postulated, I always say there is no one answer to those things, because the marketers are a diverse group, and the marketers want many things, which is why the ANA growth agenda has 12 distinct platforms to it, because everybody is in a different group. And we think about our marketer universe as three-dimensional. It runs from junior marketer right out of school to CMO. It runs across digital marketers, multicultural marketers, brand marketers, media managers, etc. So there is this very, very broad, diverse group that we have to reach out to and attempt to address those particular needs. So sure, there are hot buttons, such as what has become known as the metaverse and NFTs. Frankly, we're just in our infancy in understanding that, but there's a great degree of interest in it. Do they represent areas of great focus and opportunity? Or will they be something like blockchain, where we're still trying to figure out what absolutely to do with that, even though we know that there's a lot of embedded opportunity that's there, but just hasn't yet materialized? You mentioned purpose. Well, if I go back to the speakers at the Masters of Marketing conference just a few months ago, almost everybody talked about purpose. The acknowledgement that it is about how do we elevate the plight and welfare of all of our consumers and customers as we try to pursue growth. And Mark Pritchett has always said it famously when he says, we need to be both a force for good and a force for growth. And those things that are about good include DE&I, sustainability, brand safety, ad fraud. We have to be able, and those types of brand safety issues that we've already seen a great degree of focus in on online hate speech and the types of things that get at the core of what is challenging the US in many, many different ways. But there are great opportunities to do both, to be a force for good and a force for growth. And I think that the challenge for us is to understand where any individual marketer, be they B2B or B2C, really choose to place their bets. One interesting thing that has come out of the ANA's Global CMO Growth Council is the concept about, it isn't B2B or B2C, it's about B for H, brands for humans. And the ability to focus in on how to be able to build brands while addressing the human condition in a very, very responsible kind of way. And that's where you see people now focusing in on sustainability. How do we think about sustainability in a brand building approach that is authentic and is real? In fact, how do you even define what it is that you want to do? Are you trying to change the climate issues that we experience? Are you trying to, rid the oceans of plastic? Or are there ways to embrace just day-to-day behavior through the connections of your respective brands with those particular consumer needs that are becoming more societally responsible? I mean, we see this in autos becoming electric in nature, and that great push that Mary Barra at General Motors is pushing, and Deb Wall, and as well as all of the car companies that are out there. They're doing this in a very responsible way to basically say, yes, as we do more good, we can in fact build our respective businesses. But that also gets at the kinds of things I mentioned before in our ability to really better understand the programmatic media supply chain, the transparency issues that we have, the measurement concerns that we need to overcome. So there are organic industry-wide issues that are of great importance, but they require a longer-term sustainable focus in order to be able to make a difference.
No, very well said. And I think that is certainly the challenge of an organization like the ANA, to be able to straddle so many of the needs and issues, and to know which ones, obviously, to elevate, for the greater good. But I'm just curious, because there's been a little backlash against purpose lately. There's, people talk about purpose washing, and how some people aren't going through the entire exercise of really getting it right, and then making sure that they're acting in a purposeful manner, in line with what their aspirations are, and so on.
Yeah.
So that, like everything else, we seem to live in times where there's so much push and pull, that there's been a little bit of I've seen a little bit of a pushback on purpose. I mean, as you well know, I'm a believer in it and getting it right, and reaching beyond it, which I think will be the next frontier, which I'm quite curious about. But in terms of speaking of frontiers, let me just ask what I hope is the last COVID question for a long time. I mean, would you say that marketers are now moving on from their immediate COVID concerns, or are they still kind of grappling to continue to deal with all of this accelerated change and figure it out?
Great question. If you would have asked me prior to December 15th or thereabouts, I would have said, there was a great degree of hope and aspiration that we were nearing the end of this calamity and moving to what we spoke about before, a more certain environment that we could not necessarily return to pre-COVID days, but move to a more stable environment where we kind of can bring our practices to not have to plan in those 1 month windows, but get back to some real long-term concerns. But the latest variant Omicron is really changed the narrative again, because what it's done is, even if it's fast up, fast down, which I think we're all hoping that it ends up being, what it's done is it basically has now put the big question mark: is this going to be a continued way of life, where we're just going to move on to the next variant and the next variant, and we're just going to be plagued with these substantial global outbreaks of cases, and then unfortunately the fatalities that are associated with it? And are we going to be on that, again, unstable footing for a longer period of time? So I would say that so much is going to depend on what happens, I think, over the next 3 to 6 months. It kind of pushed the window back for really understanding where we're going to be, because right now I think there's just a great degree of uncertainty. Those people, those organizations that were going to go back to the office around January 1st, those plans have now been put on hold. Those people that, like in our business, the events business, to a degree, are we going to go back to where we used to be pre-COVID, or are we going to be back to where we were in 2020, where everything was virtual? So I think that that degree of uncertainty is going to exist for a period of time. Now, I'm usually an optimist, and I always like to look at things through rose-colored glasses. My sense is that while we'll still be plagued with some of the COVID residual for, we'll call it at least 3 to 6 months, and probably some residual activity through the balance of the year, I do think that there'll be a light at the end of the tunnel. Will we ever remove COVID? I mean, I'm not the person to give you that answer, but I'm sure we'll always have some degree of it, but at lower levels, almost like the way we navigate with the flu. Everybody will need to get maybe a COVID shot every now and then, or whatever the case may be. And that, I think, though, will create an environment where people will say, I know now how to be able to navigate. I know how to live. I can go to events. I can go outside. I'll get my shot. I'll reduce my chances of this. And that has that backlash, not backlash, but that connection to the marketing industry where, okay, if that becomes the new environment that we can count on more reliably, that will allow us to be able to craft our strategies in such a way that we can then reliably go back to creating the winners, both for brands and consumers and customers, in the way where it'll be a win-win for everybody.
Well, let's hope so. And I think we need a lot more rose-colored glasses now. I'm glad to see that, and I think that's actually quite realistic. I'd like to turn to something that
Sure.
matters a lot to me, and I think it probably matters to you as well. I'm not sure if you saw our call for nominations for the Internationalist of the Year this week,
I did.
but we talked about how marketers are gaining in corporate influence after nearly 2 years of disruption and uncertainty. I think that's something to really keep in mind. Let me give you a couple of statistics.
Sure.
The CMO survey reported that 72% of companies saw the role of marketing increase in importance over the prior year. McKinsey now tells us that 78% of CEOs expect marketing leaders to drive growth. And even Rashad Tabakawala, who's been quite a speaker at many A&A events,
Yes.
recently wrote on Substack that we are living in a marketing renaissance. Also, everyone should be happy because all the ad spending predictions are way up. So these are real milestones in terms of the business of marketing and the role of the marketer. So has this reached your membership yet in terms of do they believe that this is one of the most exciting times to be a marketer, or are they finding that it's amazingly daunting and complex as they move to the next level of this profession? Or is it a little of both? I mean,
No, I think,
I'm
yeah,
excited.
yeah, it is a little of both.
Mm.
But let's talk about the optimism and the belief in marketing's role within the growth umbrella that has become increasingly important to CEOs, if not just CMOs. And there's a core reason for that we actually touched upon a little bit earlier, and that is that if we had to go back to pre-COVID, I would say that there was probably a degree of arrogance by marketers in not necessarily staying close to their consumers and really acknowledging their respective needs. And what we saw pre-COVID were a lot of major brands losing material share of market to upstarts such as Uber and Airbnb and some of the art of shaving and things of that nature, where we'll call it the mass marketers were becoming less authentic and less responsive to consumer needs. What COVID seemed to do was to push us back to a place where we either changed or we died. And that's where we saw an incredible degree of sensitivity to the consumer come out. And that extended all the way through the CEO, who recognized that the ability for that company to succeed was through the greater connection, authentic connection to their respective consumers and customers, that essentially embellished upon what are your needs and how can we best serve them. And we've seen material changes of share of market growth back to many of those big brands because they've recognized that the pathway to growth was through their respective consumer and customer constituencies. in a changed, more sensitive, more intuitive dialogue and relationship with them. And with that success has come, I think, a fundamental fabric in the way we market. It's the reason why purpose is still important, even if it's inauthentically done by some class of marketers that are out there. But that purpose, I think, kind of says the strategic focus of companies and brands are to ensure that those relationships are solid, because you can be both a force for good and a force for growth. In fact, you must be. If you are not, you are probably under leveraging your potential on being a successful brand and business. So I do see that not only here in the US, but around the world, a foundational, if not transformational change in how we relate to our respective audiences in that regard. And I think that the innovation that's taking place in the industry will continue to foster that types of relationship, as in fact, relationships do have the potential of being far more on a one-to-one basis than ever before. Now, whether it's through the shiny objects of metaverse or NFTs or any of that, we'll see. I mean, somebody will probably figure something out, but those are the shiny objects right now. We have an incredible suite of media assets and tools to be able to make that connection. So it's up to the marketers and their respective agency partners and other people that help create the right strategies to understand what are the best ways to be able to pursue that, because those tools are very, very powerful.
It's interesting you say tools in relation to marketing Darwinism, because one of the things that I found so interesting about what you said about diversity was suddenly getting some kind of objective tools. And I also think that if CMOs are going to have greater influence and within the corporation and greater respect of both the CEO and the CFO, well, maybe they have to say things like, not only, well, we think we increased awareness, but if I spend $1 million here, I can show you that there is now $3 million of brand growth that is a direct result of that. And I think when they start thinking that way, that that place that we've talked about for so long in the C-suite only elevates, because then everyone is aligned and they're talking the same thing. And there's no question that things like purpose and stakeholder capitalism and so much of what's happened over the last several years has been a factor in moving that forward. But it's interesting that we're always coming down to measurement, which is my next question. And
Sure.
And I know we're getting to the end of our discussion here, unfortunately, but I have two last questions for you. The first one is just about what's next for the ANA. I realize that it's now been 5 years of emphasis on media transparency. I've actually noticed a couple of new programs which I'm intrigued about brands working with nonprofits, which I think we're going to see so many more types of collaboration in our, stakeholder capitalism world.
Yes.
Anything else you want to unveil about 2022 that's coming up for the ANA?
Well, you've already touched upon several areas that we have a great degree of interest in, and it goes to the broad agenda that we need to have to address the multitude of interest and needs. So there have been a couple of recent announcements. One that focused in on the fact that we've just launched a study on the programmatic media supply chain, recognizing that only approximately 50% of a marketer's expenditures reach the publisher, and then probably only 20% reach the consumer. So there's a lot of wasted and unproductive investment that is going through that supply chain that we're looking to find out far more about. Privacy will be a hot button for a long time, and it is one of the most important issues that we have to address, and we are addressing it through the next evolution of the Partnership for Responsible and Addressable Media, where we will be activating our Digital Advertising Alliance to be able to help us navigate that next generation of how do we provide that level of identification of our respective audiences so that we can do so in a privacy safe way. Some of the D&I, or I should say society and sustainability areas are through the evolution of some of our D&I areas of focusing on, getting at the minority-owned media challenge that was raised in a very substantial way in 2021, and truly embracing sustainability as a business strategy and dealing with the continued ad fraud and brand safety issues that we have. And we have programs across the board that cover all of those particular areas. And you talked about measurement. Well, we've been working on for the last year plus on a cross-media measurement initiative that we're doing in concert with the platforms and the networks that we think we're going to try to get into a pilot later this year that will hopefully be the first major step in answering what has been more than a decades old challenge that we have certainly faced. And then, of course, MarTech, which has not necessarily been top of mind, but it's an area where many marketers spend sometimes upwards of 30% of their respective investments. And we plan some initiatives this year to be able to truly get at how can we make that pool of investment dollars far more productive. So I think, as you can see from those and other initiatives, which I haven't mentioned, that the needs of the marketing industry are quite broad. And unless you consistently pursue that in a sustainable way, we're not going to succeed. And why did I choose the word sustainable? I don't mean it in the sustainability sense, but I mean to say what we can't do is just address a problem and then walk away from it. If we looked at, you mentioned media transparency 5 years ago. We did what I thought was an incredibly important study, but we didn't necessarily follow up with it with the same degree of continuity of emphasis on that. And what we've learned is that if we're going to solve marketer and industry related issues, we have to do it with an enterprise or business machine that allows us to be able to continue to push against that regularly on an ongoing basis. It can't be fast up and fast down. It just can't be about a playbook that we produce a playbook today and we walk away from it tomorrow. So they have to be sustainable efforts. Otherwise, the long-term nature of our industry will become very ad hoc, and it will move away from the standards that are necessary for us to be able to do business effectively.
No, you're right. And I think that doing things over time is the value of an organization like the ANA, for new members, for ongoing members, for, new people approaching the problem. It's just so important. Well, finally, okay, this is a quick one.
Sure.
What one word or phrase do you believe will characterize the coming year?
One word, huh? Okay.
Or phrase, Okay, for you're Bob Liodice of the ANA. You can have several words.
No, it's about taking the time to understand those consumer relationships. It is about that authenticity, and it's. I'm not going to say so much that it's about the word purpose, but it is. It all starts. I mean, if you think about the history of marketing, it's all been about how do you effectively reach the consumer to make them aware, not only of your product, but to create that relationship to move forward. And we've had a lot of stones thrown at us, whether it's through COVID, whether it's through some of the issues that we've faced that we've been talked about throughout this conversation. And I think marketers are becoming far more confident in their ability to navigate in an intelligent but entrepreneurial type of way. I do think that marketers need to become increasingly entrepreneurial. But I also think that they have to do that with a sense and a greater respect for being empirical. Marketing has always been about being an art and a science. And unless we create that entrepreneurial belief that our consumers are changing and we need to reach them in ways that they enjoy, while backing that up with the facts and data and information that allow us to be able to make those important decisions. That's kind of, to me, the broad sense of where we need to go, which will allow us to be both a force for good and a force for growth simultaneously.
Well, as usual, Bob, very thoughtful, well said, and I think you've now written the quick roadmap for 2022 and beyond. I look forward to continuing to catch up with you and see where you go next. And I'm just delighted to have spent this time with you.
Well, same here, and I hope we do this again. It's always a delight to be with you, Deb. You're one of our industry leaders, and if people don't know about you, they really should, because you're one of a kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Bob.